Good morning and welcome, everyone. I am Harold Henry, the Chief of Schools here at Baltimore Curriculum Project. Leading Minds is one of BCP's signature events, which we use for the professional development of our staff and as a general opportunity to bring all schools together for shared learning and collaboration. We also use a portion of this day during the event to invite influential and knowledgeable partners to share information and insights on issues that impact our work. We are delighted to welcome our esteemed panel, who will be introduced shortly.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to my favorite professional development day of the year. It is such a pleasure to see so many people that I love and admire, and am so grateful that they're part of our BCP family. It is my chance also today to thank you from the bottom of my heart, like Harold did, for working in our schools. Nothing is more important to our world than nurturing and educating our young people, and you all do it so well every day. The Brenda Kahn Award is a recognition of one of you great teachers. The award is in memory of a BCP coach who passed away in 2019 of lung cancer at age 49. She was a few years shy. She'd been a lifer. She came in right after college, and she was a few years shy of hitting that 30-year mark. Missed her ever since. She was a particularly effective classroom teacher and then a coach, and we came up with this award to honor an educator who exemplifies her level of dedication, preparedness, and success and joy in teaching. This year's winner of the Brenda Kahn Award is Ashley Green from Wolf Street Academy. Come on down, Ashley, while I talk about you. Come on. I know you're here. Where'd you go? Yeah, all right. I'm going to say a few words about Ashley. Ashley brings the same passion to coaching that she had as an outstanding third grade teacher at Wolf Street. She supports the teachers from pre-K through fifth grade in all content areas. She is compassionate yet honest with all teachers and does an outstanding job collaborating with her colleagues, Rachel and Katrina, to seamlessly support staff at Wolf Street. Ashley is open to feedback to continue to improve her teaching and learning. She is an amazing mom to a very active and talented, have said Hill 8th grader. All right, so Ashley's up here. We're going to take a picture with the big check. Oh, yeah, there's a $1,000 prize. And there, along with the check, equally exciting, is the a lovely marble-based, what do we call this? A trophy. There you go. Thank you, Ashley. Okay. All right, so now I get to introduce Alison Perkins-Cohen. Now, you can read all about her. She has just a really killer resume, just so much. I'm sure you all know that she has been the chief of staff for city schools for 10 years. She's had a major role in shaping the blueprint, which has increased funding for our schools. Many of you, though, may not know that some time ago she was the executive director of the Baltimore Curriculum Project. I still take great comfort in all of the policies she wrote back when she was writing policies, and we still use most of them. We have to put a new date on them every now and then, but it was Alison's work, and I take great comfort in that. And guess what? Leading Minds was her brainchild. So welcome back, Alison. Come on up.
That was the best introduction, and it is the best kind of, I'm going to be leaving when Sonia leaves, and so to be able to be home at BCP in my last 6 months is really a treasure. Baltimore Curriculum Project is is such a special place. As Harold said, you really are the standard bearer for charter operators in the state. And we, Dr. Santelises and I, rely on you heavily. The caliber of what you do, the caliber of the coaching that you offer, the caliber of the academics that you offer children, the caliber of the environments that you provide young people. You've improved the culture in these schools. They are some of the most strongest schools we have. And you do it with grace, you do it with intelligence, you do it with partnership. You are just tremendous partners. So if we ever have a school that we're concerned about, that's rocky, that we need help with, you are one of the first organizations, Laura's one of the first people we call to come and help us, and has done that many, many times. Never shies away from a challenge, never shies away from taking a school and making it better. Laura didn't tell you that I was the executive director. That was back in the day when it took two of us to do the job that Laura does by herself. We couldn't actually do it. So there was an executive director and a president, and now Laura does that all herself. 30 years for Baltimore Curriculum Project. It's hard to believe. I started in 2004 at Baltimore Curriculum Project, so I wasn't there for the full 30, but for a lot of it. And I was kind of asked to set the stage by talking a little bit about the history in the last 30 years of education. And I'm going to focus more on Baltimore, and I'm actually going to go back a little bit further than 30 years because I think the trajectory of how much Baltimore has changed is really important in stage setting in terms of kind of where we are today and where we find ourselves with some of the challenges that we have and some of the successes that we have too. So I don't think you really understand where we are with Baltimore City unless you go back a little bit further. So if you go back 60 years to 1965, and you look at what Baltimore was like then, it was a much larger city. It was 918,000 people in Baltimore City at that time. The school system at that time had 192,000 students, much, much bigger. A little bit after that came the 70s and came requirements to integrate schools and a lot of white flight, a lot of white middle-class families moving to the suburbs. And so then come 1995, the school system the city went from 918,000 families or people, to 701,000 in that short period of time. So it's almost a 25% decrease in that period of time. The school system then went down to from 192,065 to 110,000 in 1995. So that's a 43% decrease in the school system. Now in 2025, there's 568,000 people living in Baltimore, and we have a school system that saw the first increase last year in a long time. It's been decreasing. Last year we saw a 1,000 student increase. And so those changes are really important. We've also recently, one thing we've really also been aware of recently is that in the early part of Dr. Santelises' tenure, the main population we were losing was Black families. And we've been really trying to stabilize that, to kind of reverse that trend, because that's a really problematic trend that we're losing these families. But the population of Baltimore in that time also changed in terms of the demographic makeup, as I talked about white flight. So in 1965, the city was 35% African American, and by 1995, it was 60% African American. So that change in both the size, so the size impacts our representation in the legislature. So we drastically dropped from around 30 delegates in 1965 to, I think we have 14 now. It became political to fund Baltimore City as opposed to just what it should be, which is quality education should be something everybody's entitled to, and that became a change after the 70s. Other key things that I think we should mention in the last 30 years, one of the things that Laura mentioned was the 21st Century Schools. That was an initiative that, through advocacy from, I'm sure, a lot of you in this room and parents, and ACLU was really at the lead of that. We did get the right to finance improvements to buildings. Nobody gave us anything. So I think one thing we should hear, kind of again with the politics of education in Baltimore, is that Baltimore got something there. Baltimore didn't really get anything. We got the right to take money out of classrooms to finance bonds to improve buildings, and we were desperate enough that we needed to do that. That 21st century piece of legislation was critical, and we have, you can see it around the city. When you drive around the city, you see those new buildings. Most of those are places where had the pleasure of being in the Office of New Initiatives when we wrote the 10-year plan that was the basis of the 21st century. And one thing we prioritized there, Michael Sarbanes was part of that effort, and he's a treasurer, and was lucky to work with him on that. One of the things we prioritized was that Baltimore, because of that population decline that you just heard about, there was many, many more schools than were needed in terms of the population. And we couldn't maintain all those schools because of the gap I just talked about in property taxes. And so we had to make up for that gap. And the way we did that, the way we addressed it in 21st century was we had to close some of those schools. There was just no way to support them all, and they weren't providing the quality of education that students deserve. But what we theorized in that plan was that the schools that in the neighborhoods had been historically underfunded. Most of those neighborhoods are in what we know as the Black Butterfly in Baltimore, the areas that had been redlined. That's where we put the new buildings. Since Dr. Santelises came, so we're 10 years since Dr. Santelises started, 19, it does seem like that. In dog years, I think that's actually how long it is that we've been doing this. In 2016, that was at the height of really major financial challenges. The first year that we started, there was a $130 million funding gap identified. Again, we were in that tail years of the Thornton formula not being increased. And so we had to really advocate, again, losing that political clout in Annapolis meant that we really had to build relationships in order to get things done and get money funded for the school system. But so using it, having not having enough does focus the mind, and you really prioritize things. And so through her leadership at the beginning, and then we actually have resources now to implement some of these things, we really focused on critical investments like early learning. So our KRA rates are outperforming the state in many categories, and have for the last several years. Our literacy has increased dramatically. Same with our math performance. It has a long way to go, but we are seeing improvements there. Access to critical things like rigorous education, like AP courses, and not just, and what's unique in Baltimore is that we've drastically increased access while we've also increased performance. Usually when you increase access, I think 300% more of our students of color are participating in our AP courses than did 10 years ago. And yet we've seen 150% increase in our outcomes and the number of students getting a qualifying score. So that's unusual to have both expanded access and extended performance. And then our graduation rates are up, and enrollment, like I said, last year for the first time in many, many years did actually increase. That is tied to a trend that you all know about, which is the change in the Hispanic population. And that has just changed dramatically. In 1965, it was 1%. Our Hispanic population in Baltimore was 1%. That didn't change very much. By like the 2000s or so, it was still 1995, it was still about 1%, so it hadn't changed at all. By 2015, it was 5%, and now it's 20%. And so that those changes were really important and helped make sure they're one of the reasons why our population did go up, and that's the sole really reason why our population went up last year. This year, it's the sole reason it went down is because the population didn't go up because of the national context that we're all too familiar with. And then I think the last thing I would say was that COVID, because I think when Ken speaks, like that was a seismic change for everybody in terms of how we provide education. We had to think so differently about it. We really pushed to try to get back as soon as we could from COVID, and we did get back as soon as we could. I wish it had been sooner, but in the meantime, we had to figure out ways to teach students remotely, and so that was. That was, I think, we're still learning from that, and we're still applying lessons learned from that in terms of how we approach learning. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Roger Schulman, who's a tremendous partner to us, and he's going to talk about his work at the Fund for Educational Excellence. He started as a teacher in TFA, right? And he's been just a tremendous partner to us. In that first year when Sonia and I started and we had such an enormous gap, we realized quickly that one of the things we had to do was really get serious and strategic about how to develop partnerships and fundraise in order to fill gaps. And and Roger has been just an instrumental, irreplaceable partner in that work. So with that.
So really quickly, my name is Roger Schulman. I'm the president of the Fund for Educational Excellence. As Alison said, I was a teacher in Baltimore City Public Schools in the late 1900s. For those of you who don't know, the Fund for Educational Excellence is the local education fund here in Baltimore. We support the school system in a number of different ways, all ultimately aimed at trying to improve the educational experience for students in the school system. One of the ways that we do that is we go out and we talk to families and students in large numbers around very specific topics. And we try to understand how students and families and communities are experiencing different aspects of the school system. We also try to recognize what's working inside the school system through the Heart of the Schools, which is a year-long effort to celebrate principals and educators for the incredible work that they do inside of schools. But what I'm really here to talk to you about today is this third part of what we do, a very important part of what we do, which is how do we access resources for the school system. Alison just talked a lot about how important the financial resources are for what a school system needs, and the fund tries to be a partner to the school system to attract philanthropic resources. So for over 40 years, the fund has been working closely with the school system to secure and manage philanthropic resources. This slide just represents some of the current local and national funders who have projects that they are supporting inside of Baltimore City Public Schools right now. Two things that are true. One, philanthropy inside of school system really matters. Philanthropic dollars play a very, very important part in advancing work inside the school system. The second thing is that they are a relatively small part of the overall picture. So the school system's budget is about $1.7 billion a year. We maybe raise in private dollars, it's very hard to count, it's somewhere around $7 million in investment. So when you think about $7 million in the context of $1.7 billion, it seems very, very small. But the impact of those dollars can be very significant. So when I think about why philanthropic resources matter, there are three things that I think a lot about and how they can be used. The first is that they advance and accelerate innovation. When you look at big systems in a city, and it's not just school systems, it's health departments, it's any major system, they weren't actually built to innovate. And the dollars that it takes to maintain the core operating work of a system the size of Baltimore City Public Schools is huge. And when you think about $1.7 billion, and then you think about, correct me if I'm wrong, 80% of that is salary and benefits, what's left is what you have to work with. The philanthropic dollars become a higher percentage of that work. Often the philanthropic dollars are more flexible than the public dollars that are available. Public dollars come with lots of requirements, as they should. They are taxpayer dollars. Philanthropic dollars come with the restrictions or not that a funder puts on it, so it allows greater flexibility. And lastly, philanthropic dollars can help in emergency situations. They can help with urgent matters that need to be addressed quickly. But just to give some examples, financial support for district-wide efforts. These are just a few of some of the system-wide efforts that philanthropy is helping to support right now in Baltimore City Public Schools. Everything that's on this list is work that has come under Dr. Santelises' leadership. It's priorities that Dr. Santelises, that Alison, that the chiefs, that principals have decided are important to have in this school system and couldn't happen without it. I think what's interesting to think about is when I first came to Baltimore in 1992, this wasn't happening. Philanthropy was not supporting system-wide work. They were supporting outside partners that were doing work inside of the school system, but they didn't actually believe that change was happening at a system level and that philanthropic dollars could actually help move the system. And this has been a tremendous shift in the last 30 years. And that is not to say that it's all been great, right? It doesn't always work out the way that we think it's going to. The first very significant investment I can think about into the system as a whole in my time in Baltimore was in about 1998, 1999. It was the Gates Foundation first significant investment in education. One of their first grants was to Baltimore City Public Schools. It was $12 million, which was matched by $8 million in local philanthropic dollars. And for those of you who have been around for a while, you'll remember those dollars were used to break up our large comprehensive high schools, Southwestern, Northern, Lake Clifton, into smaller learning academies. So each of those high schools became 4 or 5 smaller schools. We spent about $20 million on that work, and it didn't do what we thought it was going to do. It doesn't mean it was a failure. There were lessons learned. There were things we learned from that. But it was $20 million, and there's very little sort of remnants of it in our system now, except for that everything builds upon everything. So investment in systems is relatively new. There are plenty of opportunities to invest directly in schools. There are lots of ways in which schools are leading the charge, where they are trying new things that become proof points for schools, and funders are interested in funding those kinds of opportunities. They're big and they're small, right? So sometimes it's just I don't mean to say just, it's a beautification project that really matters to a school. What an entryway to a building looks like matters to a school. It's not a huge project, but there aren't dollars for it inside a system, and there aren't flexible school dollars, so philanthropy can help do that. Sometimes schools are the right place to try something new, and funders or schools want to try it in their school and need philanthropic dollars to do it. So that's another place where philanthropy is investing. And the third that I mentioned before is key support to district partners and school partners. And this one is really interesting to me on a couple of different levels. One is this becomes a little bit of I think there's a little bit of a debate about this, because if you look at some of these partners and many, many more over the years, if you're a school leader, if you work inside a school, you can say, well, what do you mean philanthropy supports that? We pay for that partnership, right? We have a contract with them to deliver something, whether that's a system-wide contract or a school-based contract. What is often the case is that that is a fraction of what it actually costs to deliver that project. And philanthropy on the other side of the equation is funding those partners in a different way, so that when you look at the actual cost, it varies how much of that is actually being paid by school system resources, again, whether that's school-based or central office-based, versus philanthropic resources. The other piece that I find interesting about this is how this ebbs and flows and when it ebbs and flows. So we've had Dr. Santelises as our CEO for 10 years. We are about to go through a period of transition. My prediction would be these organizations start to get a lot more money in the next 6 months and in the first 6 months of next year, because people want to support the school system, but they are waiting to see what is going to happen in the school system. And philanthropy, for all their flexibility, is a little bit risk averse. So I do want to talk about, I hope I'm okay on time, I'm going to do 2 quick case studies about when I think this works really well, when philanthropy really helps advance the work of the district, and when it is, frankly, a failure. So early on, before there was the blueprint for the state, Dr. Santelises had a blueprint for Baltimore City Public Schools, and she in her first year, towards the end of her first year, had articulated 3 really clear priorities. Those priorities had implementation plans, they had significant district resources allocated to them, and at the same time, a very large national funder had issued an RFP that had really clear alignment to one of the priorities. And so the fund and the school system decided we should apply or respond to that RFP. And there were 2 tiers in that RFP. You could get a planning grant that was for $500,000, and most of the grants were going to be in that $500,000 range. And then they were going to allocate 5 implementation grants that were more like $15 million. So we worked really hard on this application, and we were like, we are applying for a planning grant. That's what makes sense for us. And we had lots of conversations with the foundation, site visits, interviews. And through the whole time, one of the things I found really, really impressive about the district was that they were very steadfast in saying, we are not adjusting this work to meet the needs of the RFP. Our work is what it is, our priority is what it is, and we're going to maintain it. And if we get the grant, great, and if we don't, we still believe this is the right work. And so the outcome of this was, and I remember this very, very well, Alison and Dr. Santelises and my colleague Kevin and I were in a room on a video call with the foundation, who told us in a video call that we were one of the 5 awardees of an implementation grant. So we thought we were getting we were hoping we were going to get $500,000, and we got 4 years and $13 million to implement the work. What came of that was an ongoing relationship with a national funder who, because of the success of that project, has funded 2 more projects inside the school system at a significant level, and has created a very important relationship and has accelerated and advanced the work of the blueprint in a way that districts simply could not have done without those funds. And it has had a significant impact, I think, on the district's reputation nationally and brought in other national funders to Baltimore. So the second case study was that City Schools was approached by a national funder who was interested in providing $3 million to the system. And that funder came and said, we will give you this money, but you have to work with these 3 partners. You can design the project with them, but you have to work with these 3 partners. And by the way, they were 3 partners that at the time the district was already working with. So it's not like they were bad partners, but they were saying you had to work with these 3 partners to get the money. And it took months and months and months to come to an agreement with the district, the funder, and the 3 partners on what the scope of work of this project would be. But the grant was ultimately awarded. What I would say was the outcome of this, though, was that it wasn't work the district really wanted to do. It wasn't, frankly, work the partners really wanted to do. And the outcome was $3 million got spent, a ton of time got spent, and again, very, very little came out of it that is advancing the work of the district, right? So philanthropic dollars are important, but they're not always the right thing for a district at a given time. And it was probably a mistake that we pursued those dollars, right? So just to wrap it up, just some lessons that I feel like I've learned is that it is critical to pursue funding that aligns with your priorities, right? There are national trends, and foundations are very susceptible to national trends. Those trends may not match your priorities, right? It is much better to turn down funding, much better to turn down funding than to accept funding you don't actually want or need, because it is not going to go well and the relationships will be harmed. You're going to end up doing work you don't want to do, and it's not going to advance your work at all. And then finally, if you take money, you got to execute the work you said you were going to do. You've got to do what you say you're going to do. You have to report on it. You have to document it, which does not mean that it has to have worked the way you thought. But you have to have learned from it. You have to be able to explain what you've learned from it. And I think if you do these things well, philanthropy can add a tremendous amount of value to any work that you're doing, and certainly inside a public system. So I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Roger. And before we get to Dr. Irma Johnson, I just want to ask you one question. So with all that background, which is really helpful, as you think about the transition we have, if we're looking forward, and we think about the transition we have coming up, how do you think about approaching a transition to make sure that that can continue?
I think the 10 years that we've just gone through, where we can show the ways, exactly what you just said, the ways in which philanthropy has helped advance the work of the district in really meaningful ways, and how that has an impact across the state. One of the challenges, not to make this about the fund, but that is hard for the, but I'm going to, but that is hard for the fund, is we really try to do our work from behind the scenes, right? We want it's the district's work. I think our role is really important, but we're not out touting the role we play, which then means in a time of transition, how do you explain it to someone else? And I think it's really, really important. And just the last thing I'll say on this is, we are also in a really interesting time in philanthropy, because like many other parts of our society right now, philanthropy is under attack for the kinds of things they fund. And it has made foundations much more cautious. They don't want to fund something that could be deemed whatever by whoever, and figuring out how to navigate that with a new team here is going to be part of the challenge.
Great. Thank you so much, Roger. Now it's my pleasure to turn to the conversation to Dr. Irma Johnson, who, Irma, I feel like would have been the obvious choice to give the history of Baltimore City schools because she is worked for city schools for 40 years. She is a historian. She knows about Baltimore. She's lived Baltimore, and she's been an expert in Baltimore City schools for 40 years. She's an assistant professor of education and leadership at Coppin State University and is currently a member of the Maryland State Board of Education, where she's helping guide implementation of Maryland's blueprint. And so really, when we're thinking about how to look forward in terms of what's coming and how do we plan for it, Irma is an expert to help us navigate that.
It is my pleasure to be with you this morning, and a lot of my friends are here, and I'm so happy to see them. I was appointed to the Maryland State Board of Education by Governor Moore in 2023, and my tenure ends in 2027. And I just wanted to share with you that members of the Board of Education in the state, for the first time, many of us are educators. And that's a very, very important fact, because we look at our positions and our work with the lens of an educator. So we're really happy that we're able to support the state schools. Now, Alison and Roger zoomed in terms of Baltimore City. I want you to zoom out with me in terms of what's happening in the state. The state has many initiatives that they're looking at, but I want to share with you 4 of the major initiatives. One is academic excellence, the Academic Excellence Program. The second is the State School Accountability System Development, Comprehensive Pre-K through 3 Literacy Framework, Pre-K through 12 Math Policy Pathways. Those are the 4 that I want to share with you today. The Academic Excellence Program comes about as a result of a study that was done by Wallace and Hub this year, where they rank the 50th states as well as DC. What they found was in 2024, Maryland ranked number 3. However, in 2025, Maryland dropped to 9th place. So even though Baltimore City has been doing well, the entire state is not. Now, it's amazing that Miss Green, where's Miss Green again? Raised your hand. Well, one of the things that they've done, and you may be happy about this in terms of looking at what can we do to make sure that we increase the academic achievement of our students, is coaches, Ms. Green. But one thing that I found out as a principal is that if you want to have smart children, you must have smart teachers. And teachers who become smart work collaboratively with coaches. So Maryland has decided that in order for us to improve the academic achievement of our students is to get together high-quality coaches so that those coaches will be in classrooms, not just in team meetings, but in classrooms, working with our teachers and aligning that work to the science of reading. We must, it is so imperative that we improve the academic achievement of all of our students. And Maryland, the State Board of Education, that becomes our focus. Our second focus is on creating a Maryland accountability system that will really determine how well schools are doing. We have a 5-star accountability system. I know that Hampstead Hill is a 5-star school. However, there are complaints about that rating. They're saying that, does it really, really measure what we want to measure? Now, under the federal government has indicated that one of the standards that we have, and that standard around curriculum, does not really fit what they deem to be appropriate. And I'll go into that a little bit further. But people have complained about our accountability rating, that they really don't understand it, it's not useful, they don't exactly know what we're trying to do with that. So the State Board of Education, along with members of the Board of Education staff, we have come up with a committee, and that committee consists of superintendents, teachers, principals, assistant principals, and other stakeholders at looking at the accountability system to see how we can amend or we can revise it so it is a meaningful tool that we can use to actually improve and continue to improve our schools. So relooking at our accountability system is the second major initiative of MSDE. The third initiative that the Maryland State Board of Education is looking at is our literacy program. We have, and I know that you still use direct instruction, right? Direct instruction. So you're really already ahead of the game, right? Because it's going back and looking at phonics and phonemic awareness and many of the skills that you all teach, but looking again at the science of reading. It's not new that some of us old folk know, I'm counting myself in that the best way to teach young people how to read is through phonemic and phonetic analysis. So everything that's new is old. So we're just kind of going back to what we knew were good practices in terms of the science of reading. Maryland has implemented this program throughout the state. The key to this is that we're not telling individual districts what to teach. We've given them, if you go online, there is a list of instructional practices that are research-based, that there's evidence that if you use them and you use them with fidelity, then you will have growth. So we're asking all of our schools, all of our LEAs, to use the science of reading as their basis of improving reading. And with that, hopefully, we're looking right now at grades pre-K to 3. Hopefully that will reduce the number of students that you have going into special education programs who have lags in reading development if you're actually using this program to increase your literacy program. We think that these are some of the things that will happen as a result of using the science of reading. There will be a universal literacy screening 3 times a year, and that started last year. Students reading improvement plans, just like we have kids who have IEPs to improve their reading. Then I don't know if you all do this in direct instruction and in your schools, but for students who once they've gone through the screening and there's an indication that they need additional support, a plan is developed with the parent for that student in reading so that we can stop the number of students who are leaving second and third grade who can't read. We've really got to address that. And then you get to this blame game, Roger. I'm serious. The elementary teachers will blame the parents. The middle school teachers will blame the elementary school teachers. The high school teachers will blame the middle school teachers. And then the professors at college blame the high schools. So we've got to stop that train. And one of the ways that we can do that is to make sure all of our children are entering fourth grade as readers. We're also implementing the multiple tiered system of support and intervention. And I know that you've probably already been using that program. There's a policy in the state that will begin this year, 2027, that if a student is not reading at the third grade level by third grade, there's a possibility for retention. But that is one of the plans this year. The last thing that I wanted to talk about is the Maryland pre-K to 12 math policy. Again, the standards have been rewritten for math policy, and that will be coming out for you if you don't have it already to implement in your classrooms. Again, you know, if you looked at the results of the math assessments in your schools, the scores are not really good. And again, as I've indicated, that Maryland dropped from 3rd to 9th. And mostly it was in that area of math. So we are going to require that there's at least a 60-minute daily instruction in math in grades K to 8. There's also been a rearranging of the algebra content in terms of replacing the algebra project with algebra 1, and then geometry, and then algebra 2. So it would be more like the algebra 1 and 2 together, and then data analysis that leads to involvement there. Those are the 4 big rocks policies that the state is looking at this time. But we do need your help. As Alison indicated about the schools and being able to create new schools in Baltimore, it was legislators that we had to go and see. Part of your job as an educator is, yes, to instruct and give the best instruction for your students, but it is also to advocate for education. So when we call for you all to come to Annapolis to help us, I'm telling you, there's a freeze right now on the money for the blueprint. You're going to have less money. When there's a call for teachers to come out to support educational policies in Annapolis, please join us. We need you. We need your support. And thank you again for allowing me to speak with you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson. It's a pleasure to have you here, and your wealth of expertise and career serving young people is really appreciated. One question before we go to Ken Shelton is I want to talk a little bit about with some of those initiatives you talked about, Irma, with with the science of reading or with coaching. How do you think about at the state level implementing strategies that are research-based strategies like that. They make sense across a state when you've got such different jurisdictions, different sizes. You've got urban, you've got rural, you've got different levels of readiness, you've got different levels of tenure of superintendents. Like, how does the state think about that?
So we actually, Alison, that's a very good question. And one of the things that we gave much thought to that. That's why there's a menu. So we're not saying to any LEA, you must use this or you must use that. But here's a menu of different strategies that you can use that are research-based, that if you use them, we would guarantee that you will have the results that you need. So we're not saying to any LEA, you must use this. But look, and if you come up with a different instructional strategies that are research-based that you feel that you can implement in your district that will give us the results that we need, you're more than well to use them. So we're not saying that you must, but here's some of the things that you need. But you can't go on Pinterest.
Okay, appreciate that. Okay, so very excited to introduce Ken Shelton. We zoomed in, as Irma said, to Baltimore. She zoomed us out to the state, and now we're going to zoom forward, looking at kind of the future of education. Ken is an expert in artificial intelligence and use of it in education. He does really exciting work around educational technology. He's a thought leader in this area, and he's a long track record of being committed to educational equity and using technology to help further that. So very excited to introduce Ken Shelton.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So before I begin, I want to, how many of you in the room, I'm going to assume that at least some of you, are familiar with the term and the concept of Sankofa? I got a few. For those of you that aren't, it means it's not taboo to go back and get what you lost. And the reason why I say that is I'm going to connect some dots here, is the whole idea around using historical context to build a better future. So watch this. There's something that will impact where funding gets allocated, how it's applied with instruction, and what we do with it, okay? And you want to know what that is? It's technology. And you might be like, oh, Ken, I don't know. Watch this, because I got receipts. What was happening from March of 2020 to September of 2020? And during that time period, there were many of us, me included, who were like, not as a flex, by the way. We were like, okay, remember all those years when we kept saying that we need to empower educators and students to have technology in their hands, and going one-to-one was for the privileged, and it was a luxury, not a necessity. And what happened? Oh my God, we got to do it. And by the way, let me add one more part to it. Thank you, one more part to it. It wasn't just the tech. It was, where was the funding allocated for the tech? It was, how was the tech aligned with instruction, and how was PD aligned with how teachers were actually using the tech? Because you're seeing it now with, the vilification of screen time. And I'm like, it ain't the screens, it's what you're doing when you are on screen. Okay, so I share all that because part of it, I had the privilege of working on a task force for not our current, but our previous state superintendent, where back it was from 2010 to 2012, I was on the task force, and you can't make this up. 2010 or 2012, and the theme of the task force was literally, no child left offline. Yeah, that was 2010 or 2012, and what did we learn in 2020? It's not just digital inequity, it's a digital divide. If you look at where funding is allocated and how it's applied with a standards-based instruction, there are certain equity aspects that need to be considered. And again, for time's sake, I won't go through all of them right now, but even something as simple as digital redlining. Yeah. You know how I know that? Because in 2020, it was, well, we need to have the kids doing all this stuff online. I'm like, but you assume that they even have internet access. And you assume that they even have broadband internet access. So why am I sharing all that? Because it directly connects to another thing. How many of y'all heard about AI? All right, watch this. How many of you use AI knowingly? Yeah, you see, I'm going to throw that in there. And how many of you are using it unknowingly? Everybody's hand should be going up right now. Why is that important? Because that is where a lot of the funding is being allocated right now, and that is where there is an effort to shoehorn it into our instructional practices. And my whole thing around technology is it's not so much the use of tech, it's how does tech remove anticipatory and historical barriers to teaching and learning? How does it serve as a catalyst for empowerment for teachers and for students? And how do we use it in the context of our learning environments that accelerates learning in ways that support learners in realizing their full potential, so that we don't have the college professors blaming the high schools, the high school teachers blaming the middle schools, the middle school teachers blaming elementary schools, and us trying to figure out where we're going to do our funding. So I'm going to ask y'all another question real quick. Who in the room believes that literacy is important? Okay, good. So now I've established common ground there. This is how UNESCO defines literacy, and I love this definition for several reasons. One, a continuum of learning and proficiency in reading, writing, and using numbers throughout life. But the other part is to consider the expanded definition. It includes the encompassing of digital skills, media literacy, information literacy, skills necessary for sustainable development, global citizenship, and employment. And that's where I see a gap with many of the students in many of the school systems throughout this country. And yes, what is the pattern? It's many of the school systems that serve a predominantly historically excluded and marginalized student population. I don't see those right there. What I see is we're going to focus on literacy, reading, writing, arithmetic, but usually that's taught in what I would say antiquated pedagogical practices. It's not culturally responsive, it's not contextually relevant, and it's not empowering. But the whole idea here, if you'll notice, that definition and the functional part, the contextual understanding, and the empowerment all serves a purpose. And so if we believe that literacy is important, which you all raise your hand to, then we also have to accept the fact that it has to extend beyond what I would say are the historical definitions of what that looks like. And yes, it does include the use of technology, because the whole idea is, why is literacy important? It allows all of us to take flight. And I used to say this to my students all the time. And I'll share with you all how I define literacy this afternoon as well. So what does it do? The expanded definition, it supports us in meaning making. And I'm going to give you all an example of meaning making, even when it comes to things like math. So when I was teaching students about probability, I'm like, all right, we're going to learn some of the functions with probability, but watch this. We're going to learn about probability in the context of the lottery. Yeah, y'all are probably like, what? Yeah. I go, okay, watch this. We're going to learn about probability because in California, it's public data. So, of course, I told the students, I'm like, you all really want to develop the skill set of a data scientist, because then you will watch how when the math is mathing, the numbers don't lie, and how those numbers can support you, but they can also be weaponized against you. The lottery is an example. And I said, so the provocation was, if I spend $5 per week playing the lottery, how much money will I totally spend? And at what point will the probability increase of me winning? And will my winnings at minimum recoup what I invested in? You see that? Now you might say, oh, geez, can you do that? That was with 8th graders in algebra class. Why did it matter to them? Because they know the lottery. And now it's meaning making. I'm making meaningful value and contextual understanding of those numbers. That's the whole idea of an example of meaning making. Then with literacy, it's participation. I hear it all the time. We want students engaged. We want to engage. And y'all see later I'll have a thing. I'm not going to dispute engagement, but I always follow it up with, are we talking passive engagement or active engagement? Am I being schooled or am I learning? My goal as a teacher was, I want to go beyond that to investment and to ownership. I want you to be invested in your learning, and then by way of empowerment, I want you to take ownership of it. Because that's the goal. Continuing on, empowerment. Ask students, I do this all the time, what are the gifts that you actually bring to the learning environment? And I will watch the students struggle with that question because they were never asked that question. And in fact, my guess is most of you were never asked that question outside of a job interview. And so the whole idea is if you ask that and you understand that, that can lead to empowerment. And then, of course, it does connect to a global understanding, recognizing that while things may be hyper-local, trust me on this, I've had the privilege of working in more than 50 different countries, and I see a common through line depending upon what the country is. What happens locally impacts globally. What happens globally impacts locally, for sure. All of that fits into the context of literacy, and all of that fits into how we use technology, and all of that is going to be impacted by artificial intelligence. So what's happening right now is the following. AI is a threat, nothing but fears, bans, and moral panic. There's a nostalgia for a pre-AI past. We're going back to blue books. I don't know if y'all saw that. And then, of course, we must stop this. And then there's the AI is inevitable. So in other words, you can't stop it. Adoption without any degree of interrogation, efficiency over meaning, and we supposedly have no choice. Here's the problem with those. The real danger isn't choosing the wrong pill, it's believing that there's only two options. The whole idea is it's not a blue or a red pill. It's not a binary choice. It's recognizing that if this is the pattern, how do we break this cycle? So here are some questions for you all to consider when it comes to really technology, but even our artificial intelligence. What counts as learning? Who benefits? Who decides? What barriers exist? And what must we protect? You see, hopefully you all are seeing, I'm always in the shades of gray when it comes to technology. I'm not going to be all in with blinders, and I'm not going to be all out with barriers. Let me thoughtfully navigate through. And again, I'll go more in detail this afternoon. The whole idea, as I work my way to conclude here, is that my encouragement to you all is definitely to reject the binary thinking, recenter learning, and reclaim your agency. What do we do that tech and AI specifically cannot and should not replace, but then how might it help us recenter learning and reclaim agency? You brought up some statistics, and I know this all the time, especially with teachers. One of the more definitive reasons why you're seeing such a significant attrition rate with teachers is burnout. So that's where I say that's where we want the technology potentially to slot in. Whole thing that I saw this quote where it was like, I don't want AI to do my writing for me. I want AI to do my laundry for me so I can spend more time writing. And so how does AI fit into that puzzle? Number one, it's us recalibrating what we do. It's looking at what are pedagogically sound and foundational things that we do, and how does that fit into that? One of the things that, and I'll bring it up later, but I hear hopefully you all have heard the term cognitive offloading. Okay, and if you haven't, that's a fear that many educators have and people have in general, that I'm going to let AI do my thinking for me. Part of me with the recalibration goes back to that definition you saw with UNESCO, and we'll do some activities on this later, is if I recalibrate learning, I'm not going to have AI do my thinking for me, but I am going to have it maybe help me foster different ideas, may help me develop talking points to question things. But I'm also going to develop a digital awareness that I'm not going to believe everything that it tells me. And I'll go more into that this afternoon. But it's really looking at, again, recalibrating what we do. And so the whole idea, as I work to the conclusion here, is for you all to reject the jazzy jargon. We get inundated with jargon and acronyms. And I'll give you an example of that. A couple of years when I taught, there was a big focus in LA Unified on rigor. I'm like, okay. How do you define it? The whole idea is if you don't define it and give a contextual example, then it becomes jazzy jargon, or what I describe as it becomes a mindless platitude. We have to define terms and then apply them in context. And then again, that connects to the mindless platitudes. I am not a tool-first person. I am an educational technologist, but I am not a tool-first person. I am a human-centered person first, and then map the tools to the experience that I want educators and learners to have. And then the whole false urgency, which is, oh my God, if you don't do it now, you're already behind. Not true. You are where you are. The whole idea is, where are we now and where do we want to be? What we do want to embrace are these things: the critical thinking aspect, the sense making of it, ethical reasoning. That's a whole big one that I'll talk more about this afternoon. And then for you all, it's the professional judgment. The question I always pose to educators is, if you want to use AI to personalize education, before we get to the AI, tell me about your learners. Because if you can't answer that question, AI is not going to fill in that blank for you. In fact, it actually might cause more harm if you don't do that. What are they like? What are their needs? What are their opportunities for growth? I'm a big believer in asset framing of terminology, not deficit. I used to have students say to me, you know what, I'm deficient in blank. And I'm like, no, you're not deficient. That's an opportunity for growth. There's a difference. We're going to flip that around. Like, you can't be good at everything. So the areas where there is an opportunity there that you need improvement is an opportunity for growth. Okay? So I'll finish off with the following. AI should be in service of and not a replacement for you and what you do. We do want to think about all of those things in the context of meaningful teaching and learning, and how it will impact students and how it will impact all the areas of instruction that you all just saw with Dr. Johnson's presentation, and even how we might advocate for where funding is allocated around those things, and then reject that binary approach. And then my last question or provocation for you all is the following: is what are the foundational learning practices your learning community must protect, no matter what technology comes next? How can AI be designed to serve those rather than distract or detract from them? So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Ken. It was wonderful. You obviously got a lot of fans here, especially, I think, the laundry, doing AI doing your laundry. I was my biggest fan. I'm your biggest fan for that. I guess, what is your fear kind of us failing to find the third option, and like what will go wrong?
Let me say this, but I'm also going to say that one of the problematic things I find with education is not education itself, is that many of society's ills get placed at the feet of education that is historically underfunded, under-resourced, and under-supported, yet we bear the brunt of all of society's ills. Yeah. So I say that because the whole idea of the danger of not looking at that third option is it's layered. So one is, when I see draconian bans, I don't say whether it's right or wrong. I just ask, then what valuable digital skills are students potentially losing out on? Because in the end, the reality is we live in a digitally connected world, and it will even become more digitally connected. And there's a reason why that UNESCO definition is dynamic with respect to digital skills. The other thing is for students to develop an awareness of how and when technology is helpful versus when it could be harmful. I do that all the time with AI. I say to students, I know you use it. My question is, if I were to draw a continuum, I use it to help me with my learning. Then there's a line. It's replacing my thinking. Where's that line for you? Because if you don't know, that's something that they should know. And it's also, I have another story later, but it's also things like, you all know that AI is used to calculate your credit score. See, it permeates our lives whether we want it to or not. And so even something as rational as Ken has 9 different credit cards and he only uses 2. Well, then why do you have so many credit cards? Get rid of the others. Because I know the game of my credit score. The minute I start closing those accounts, my credit score will actually go down. So it's understanding, again, it's relevant context. It's understanding all of those things that are necessary for us and for our students to recognize that, yes, this technology, it's a Voltaire quote I used to share with my students that was popularized in Spider-Man. And it's, with great power comes great responsibility. And I'm like, technology gives us great power, but it also requires great responsibility. And if you're not responsible in your use, then it can shape what you think, it can shape how you feel, and it can also determine the decisions that you make for yourself that you have essentially offloaded rather than asserting your own agency.
Okay, so I'm going to now bring in the audience. So using technology. We did get questions from everybody. So for all of you, I guess one question is, thinking about the last 30 years in education, where we've seen a variety of trends. Which trend do you think was the most beneficial for our schools?
I think creating ILTs, because as a principal, I know there is a heavy lift all the time. But if you have thought partners in the work, it makes individuals feel that they're a part of the process, that they have some skin in the game. So creating the ILTs gave teachers and other staff members the ability to say, this is how we want our students to behave. This is how we want our students to learn. This is how we want to create the culture in our school that's a culture of everybody learning, not just students, but students, principals, and teachers. So I think that's a great effort for us in schools, the ILTs.
One of the trends that I would like to see even more amplified is, and again, I'm using technology as the conduit here, is building, it kind of connects on Dr. Johnson's building community. Like all of us in this room, if you think about it, we're here together. This is a community, but for the use of the term community, is not limited to the walls of this physical space. It's using technology to find your people. It's sharing ideas. I'm in the classroom, and I always say that it's interesting how in education, how much we say we value collaboration, but yet it can be very isolating and very lonely. There were many times where I was like, am I the only one experiencing this? And then, of course, when I started looking towards my PLN, my Professional Learning Network, I realized, oh no, what you're experiencing is actually everybody, is normal. But so then once you do that, it's like, okay, then what are the strategies that others have done to either overcome feelings of isolation or, even something as simple as I designed a lesson plan that didn't land as, it didn't meet my expectations, but it's not an indictment on me because others have had to go through, walk similar paths. So I do think that trend around building community that is not limited to the physical or geographical boundaries, I think that's a trend that I would like to see. I would like to see it accelerated and amplified further.
This is a hard one for me to answer, in part because I think one of the challenges in education and with trends is it just swings a pendulum very far, and we lose what's on the other side of it. And I don't think we're always good in education at sort of finding the middle. We overcorrect or we move too far in one direction or another. So trends worry me in that way because they come and go, and we lose some of the learning of what's been in the past. When I think about this, though, what I think is very different and to me matters a lot, and it had a lot to do with how I entered the profession, is we've thought more about how people can enter this profession. And there's been a lot of work done to think about how we attract more people to the profession of education and how people come into this field. And I would imagine if we went through this room, many of you came in through very traditional pathways. Some of you came in through alternative pathways. Some of you came in as career changers. And opening up the world of education for people who want to enter it through multiple pathways was very, very new when I entered the profession, and people were incredibly skeptical of it. And I think that one of the things we've seen, and there's really good data on this, because there's been so much debate about how people enter the profession, and there was some research done that showed we're just having the wrong discussion. That you can look at how one enters the profession, and you are going to have very effective teachers no matter how they entered the profession. You're going to have ineffective teachers no matter how they entered the profession, and you're going to have a bunch who are growing and moving in that direction. And the debate around how one enters the profession is the wrong debate. How we continue to grow people in the profession, no matter how they entered, is the conversation we should be having. So I think that trend.
Okay, thank you. So for our last question, I'm going to try to combine some questions or some of the sentiments from questions that I've seen. So one is people, I wanted to know, of course, what we see the next 30 years looking like. And another question is about what, if you had to pick one thing that every classroom should have, what would that be? And I guess, so thinking about in terms of how quickly the landscape is changing and understanding that over the next 30 years, how it's going to change, what is that one thing that you would want every school, what is the one strategy or thing that you would want every classroom to have?
So I can't think about classrooms, but I do think about teachers. And I do think one thing that every teacher would like to have is a second set of hands. And knowing that, we really can't do that, but one of the things that was included, now listen to me. One of the things that was included in the blueprint was to make sure that teachers had enough common planning time. And that was actually frozen in the blueprint because we don't have enough teachers at this time to give you all the time that you need. Who doesn't want to not take work home in the evening and work all evening and then come back early in the morning and start working again? So having common planning time for teachers so that they could actually do what other professions do, work during their work hours and go home and relax, something that we don't do. So that's one of the things that I think that every teacher wants. And if teachers have that, then we can make sure that they're up and ready and to go with our students and everybody's on board. Common planning time or another set of hands for teachers.
For me, actually, it's in two parts. So the first part is, why is it that education is the only public service industry of which we are told to do more with less? We don't say that to our policemen, our police departments. We don't say that to our fire departments. Yet I would happily have a debate with anybody that if we were to contend and agree that police and fire are essential public services, then you can't exclude education out of that as well. We shouldn't be told to go the extra mile. In fact, I used to say this. I'm like, there's two places I won't go, the extra mile or above and beyond. Not going to happen. Not going to happen because there's a direct correlation between that and lack of efficacy and burnout, okay? Now, with that being said, to even what you heard earlier, I would just ask all of you this question, and it's just something for you to consider, and I don't want you to take it as a burden that you carry on your shoulders, but I know for me, going back to the sustainability of the profession, okay? If you were to ask kids about their experiences, and I would ask you about your experiences, you've got two options. Would you describe schooling for you as survival or thrival? Okay? And I already know what the answer is for most of us. So that is a sustainably long-term investment that if we provide learning environments of which our youth are thriving, then you increase the likelihood of them adding to their list of things for the future of being an educator. But if it is survival, you decrease that likelihood, because why on earth would we choose a profession that treated many of us, me included, in such a way that I describe my schooling, including higher ed, as survival, not thrival?
Sorry, this one, because I spent my entire career in and around Baltimore City, so when I hear that question, honestly, my first instinct is heat. Air conditioning, right? That's what I wish every classroom had. When I think about it more globally, it is something I think a lot about in my own life is, does my conscience and my conduct align? And when we talk as a society about how important education is, there are so many decisions that get made along the way that tell us that is absolutely not true. It is not important. I run a relatively small organization, right? And what anybody would tell me is, if you want to understand the priorities of an organization, look at their budget. Their budget will tell you what their priorities are. What you allocate your resources to will tell you what your priorities are. So when I think about school and education, and I think about our society, and we say over and over and over again that education is important, to adequately and sufficiently fund an education that allows us to do what we know is right for kids is what I wish we had in every classroom.
We're really fortunate to have such a well-experienced and thoughtful group of education leaders here to inform us today. So a warm round of applause for our speakers.
Couldn't let this opportunity go by without recognizing Alison with a special award. I think what we can all agree on is that she is formidable. She has her fingers in lots of, just the work that this woman has produced these years is something. And can we all agree that she is a big cheese? She is a big cheese. So for our big cheese, she has a cheese board, and on it says, "For a great big cheese, thank you, Alison, for 30 years, and 2 bottles of Sauvignon Blanc," which I hear from Sam is your favorite. There you go. You're a great big cheese. All right. Thank you, everybody.